It was an ordinary afternoon that didn't feel any different from the others. The sun was warm and the air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. A young woman was driving home after a long day at work. She wasn't in a rush. She had rolled down the window halfway, letting the wind brush across her face. Her small car wasn't new, but it was enough to take her wherever she needed to go. Life wasn't easy, but she managed with quiet strength and a calm spirit that few people noticed. She was passing through a stretch of road that ran along a wooded area, the kind of place where traffic was usually light. There were only a few other cars moving along. She hummed softly to a tune playing on the radio, lost in her own thoughts. Everything seemed peaceful, until she noticed something ahead that made her heart stop. About 100 meters down the road, smoke was rising from a car that had crashed into a guardrail. At first, she thought it was a small fire, maybe just steam from the engine. But as she got closer, she realized it wasn't. Flames were licking the front of the car, growing stronger by the second. Her eyes widened in shock. She pulled her car to the side of the road and jumped out. A few other vehicles had already stopped, and a small crowd was forming at a distance. Some people were talking on their phones, likely calling for help, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She felt a wave of fear rush through her body, but something else pushed her forward. Instinct. She ran toward the burning car, coughing as the thick smoke filled her lungs. She could hear the faint sound of someone crying from inside. It was high-pitched and desperate, a child's voice. The sound tore through her and she didn't think twice. She rushed to the driver's side, but the door was jammed. The flames were spreading fast, creeping along the hood and up toward the windshield. The heat was unbearable, but she moved around to the other side, her hands trembling as she tried the rear door. It was locked. She pulled harder, using all her strength, until finally the handle gave way and the door opened slightly with a creak. Through the smoke, she could see a small child strapped into her car seat crying uncontrollably. Her eyes watered and she coughed hard, but she reached in anyway. It's okay, I've got you," she said in a trembling voice, though she wasn't sure if the child could even hear her. The seatbelt buckle was stuck. She fumbled with it, her hands slippery from sweat, her heart pounding louder than the crackling fire. She yanked at it again and again until it finally released. She scooped the child into her arms and backed out quickly, nearly losing her balance. The moment she stepped back, a loud pop echoed. One of the tires burst from the heat. The flames jumped higher and people screamed. She stumbled away from the car, clutching the child tightly to her chest. Her clothes were smudged with ash and her arms burned slightly from the heat, but she didn't let go. She ran a few steps farther, then knelt on the ground, checking the child. The little one was coughing, eyes red from the smoke, but alive. Someone ran over and handed her a bottle of water. She wiped the child's face gently, whispering words of comfort. "You're safe now, sweetheart. You're safe." The crowd that had been frozen moments ago now moved closer, their phones out recording the scene. Some people started clapping. Others were in tears. She didn't even look at them. Her focus was on the child, who was now clinging to her shirt, crying softly into her shoulder. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. Fire trucks and ambulances arrived, and the professionals took over. Paramedics rushed to her side, taking the child carefully from her arms. They checked her too, asking if she was hurt. She shook her head, still dazed. The firefighters battled the blaze, which soon consumed what was left of the car. It was completely destroyed, a blackened shell that sent shivers down her spine when she looked at it. She realized how close she and the child had been to something much worse. Then came the sound of another car pulling up fast. A black SUV stopped abruptly and a man stepped out. He looked powerful, the kind of person used to control and command, but at that moment all that vanished from his face. His expression broke when he saw the paramedics holding his child. "My baby," he cried, running toward them. He took the child into his arms, shaking, whispering words no one else could hear. The woman stood quietly a few steps away, watching the reunion with a heavy heart. She felt relief wash over her, but also a strange sense of distance, as if the world had suddenly moved too fast for her to keep up. The man turned to her. For a few seconds he didn't speak. He just looked at her, trying to find words. His eyes were filled with gratitude and disbelief. You saved my child?" he asked, almost as if he couldn't believe it. She nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. I saw the car and heard him crying. I couldn't leave him there. The man's lips trembled slightly. Thank you. You saved his life. You saved my life. He reached out, taking her hand briefly, his grip firm and shaking at the same time. People around them watched quietly. Some took pictures, but the moment between them was private, raw, and real. He looked like a man who had faced everything money could fix, except this. After a while, the paramedics insisted on taking the child to the hospital for a full checkup. The man followed, still holding his son close. The woman declined a ride to the hospital, saying she just needed a moment to sit down. A kind bystander gave her water, and she sat by the roadside, her knees weak. She stared at the smoke rising into the sky, her heart still pounding. It all felt unreal. She had never thought of herself as brave. She had just done what anyone would do, or at least what she hoped anyone would. Later that night, the story spread across the news and social media. Videos from witnesses were everywhere, showing her running into the flames, pulling the child out, holding him in her arms. Her face was covered in soot, her eyes wide with fear and determination. People called her a hero. Reporters wanted to know her name, her story, her reason for risking her life for a stranger. But she didn't feel like talking. She turned off her phone and sat quietly at home, her thoughts circling around the image of the crying child and the father's shaking hands. She didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear the sound of the fire crackling and see the smoke swirling around her. But alongside the fear, there was something else, a calm sense of peace. She had done something good, something that mattered. In her simple life, that feeling was rare. The next morning, her doorbell rang. She hesitated before opening it. Standing outside was a man in a suit, holding a bouquet of white flowers. He introduced himself as an assistant. "Sir would like to thank you in person," he said politely. She was confused for a second before realizing who he meant, the father of the child. She tried to refuse, saying it wasn't necessary, but the assistant smiled. "He insists. Just a few minutes of your time." Reluctantly, she agreed. Later that afternoon, a car came to pick her up. The driver was respectful, quiet. When they arrived, she realized they were at a large, elegant house surrounded by tall gates. It was the kind of place that looked more like a small palace than a home. She felt nervous stepping inside, her simple clothes a stark contrast to the shining marble floors and grand staircase. The man was waiting for her in the living room. He looked different now, calmer, more collected, but still deeply emotional. He stood as soon as she entered. "I don't even know how to begin," he said softly. "You saved my child's life. No words will ever be enough." She tried to smile, feeling out of place. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done it." He shook his head. "No, they wouldn't. There were people there, but only you went near the car. You risked your life for someone you didn't even know." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I can give you anything you want. Money, a new car, a job, anything." She shook her head quickly. "Please, I don't need anything. I'm just glad your child is safe. That's all that matters." He looked at her for a long time as if trying to understand her. Then he said quietly, "You remind me of something I've forgotten, what it means to care without expecting something back." His voice cracked slightly, and he looked away. "You changed something in me that I didn't know needed changing." The conversation was short, but something about it stayed with both of them. When she left his house, she felt lighter but also curious. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The rescue had not only saved a child's life, it had set in motion a series of events that would change hers forever. That night, as she walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, she thought about the man's face, his trembling voice, and the way the little boy had clung to her. The world had watched a dramatic rescue, but for her, it was something quieter, a moment that revealed what was hidden inside her heart. And though she didn't realize it yet, the man she saved that day would soon reappear in her life in ways she could never have expected. The story wasn't over. It had just begun. The days that followed felt strange for her. Life had gone back to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Every time she walked into a store or past a group of people, she caught whispers and glances. Some recognized her from the news clips that had gone viral, the woman who had run into a burning car to save a child. A few even stopped her to say thank you or to ask how it felt to be called a hero. She always smiled politely and said the same thing. "I just did what anyone would do," but inside she didn't feel like a hero. She still remembered the heat of the flames, the choking smoke, and the fear that had nearly made her turn back. She had been terrified, and that part no one saw. Everyone loved the bravery, but they didn't see the trembling hands and sleepless nights that came after. At her small apartment, she tried to keep things normal. She went to work, cooked dinner, listened to the radio, and sometimes looked at the faint burn marks on her arms that were slowly healing. Yet deep down, she felt like the world was watching her in a way it never had before. She didn't crave attention, and the sudden spotlight made her uneasy. Then one afternoon, she received an envelope in her mailbox. It was thick, cream-colored, with her name neatly written in dark ink. Inside was a letter, short and formal. It was from the same man whose child she had rescued. He thanked her again and asked if she would be willing to attend a small dinner at his company headquarters. It wasn't public, he assured, just a personal gesture to express his gratitude. She stared at the letter for a long time, unsure what to do. Part of her wanted to ignore it and stay away from all the attention, but another part of her felt it would be rude not to go. After all, he was just saying thank you. So she agreed. 2 days later, a car came to pick her up. The driver was the same polite man from before, and the ride was quiet. When they arrived, she saw a tall glass building in the city center. It gleamed under the sunlight, a symbol of wealth and power. She felt small walking through the wide lobby, where people in suits hurried past with phones pressed to their ears. The man was waiting in a private dining room on the top floor. He stood when she entered, a genuine smile on his face. This time he seemed more relaxed, though there was still a certain authority about him, the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of leading people. "I'm really glad you came," he said. "I didn't know if you would," she smiled faintly. "I wasn't sure either." He laughed softly, a warm sound that eased her nerves. They sat down and he began to speak, not like a businessman, but like someone who had been deeply changed. "You know," he said, pouring water into her glass, "I've met many people in my life, successful ones, powerful ones, but never someone who would run into fire for a stranger. When I saw that video, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you." She lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't think, I just heard your child crying. Anyone would have done the same." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but they didn't, you did." For a few seconds, silence filled the room. Then he leaned back and said, "I'd like to do something for you, anything, you name it." She shook her head gently. "Please, you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad your son is okay." He looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her face. Then he smiled a little sadly. "You're different," he said. "You don't want anything, do you?" She thought about that question and shook her head. "I have enough. Maybe not much, but it's enough." He nodded slowly, almost as if her words had hit him harder than she realized. For a man who had everything, hearing someone say that must have sounded strange. They talked for a while, not about money or business, but about simple things. He asked about her life, her family, her work. She told him about her small apartment and her ordinary job, about how she liked quiet evenings and how she never expected something like this to happen. He listened carefully, like her words mattered. When dinner ended, he walked her to the car himself. Before she left, he said, "You might not want anything, but I still owe you. Not just for saving my son, but for reminding me that kindness still exists." I forgot what that felt like. She didn't quite know how to respond. She simply nodded and thanked him for the dinner. As the car drove her home, she looked out at the city lights and thought about what he had said. There was something heavy in his voice, a loneliness she hadn't noticed before. In the days that followed, her life began to shift in small ways. The story faded from the news, but not from people's hearts. She received letters from strangers thanking her for her courage. Some shared stories of their own, times when they had been too afraid to act or when someone had helped them unexpectedly. Reading those messages made her realize how one moment could ripple through so many lives. Then one morning she received another visit. It was the same man again, but this time without any assistance or formalities. He looked tired, as if he had been thinking about something for days. He asked if they could walk for a bit, so they went to a nearby park. As they walked along the path lined with old trees, he said quietly, "You probably think I'm doing fine. Rich, comfortable, all that. But after what happened, I've been asking myself something I've never asked before. What's all of this for? The money, the business, the pressure. None of it mattered when I thought I might lose my child. She listened silently. He went on. That day when you saved him, I realized something. You didn't hesitate because you had nothing to lose. You did it because you cared. And He paused, taking a breath. I've spent my whole life trying not to care too much about anyone or anything. I thought it made me stronger. His voice softened. But maybe it made me smaller. She didn't know what to say. There was something deeply human about hearing a man like him speak with such honesty. She finally said, maybe caring doesn't make us weak. Maybe it's what makes us human. He looked at her then, really looked, and smiled faintly. You always say simple things, but they sound like truths I've been running from. They sat on a bench for a while, watching children play in the distance. It was a quiet moment, but it carried a sense of change. Before he left, he said, I'm starting something new. A charity for fire safety, rescue training, things that can help others like you did. I want to dedicate it in your honor. She shook her head quickly. Please don't use my name. I don't want that kind of attention. He smiled. Then we'll call it something else. But you'll know it started because of you. That night, she lay awake thinking about him, not as a powerful man, but as a father and a human being who had been shaken to his core. The thought warmed her heart. She realized that courage had done more than save a life that day. It had softened another person's heart and maybe changed how he saw the world. Over the next few weeks, they stayed in touch occasionally. Sometimes he sent short messages to ask how she was doing. Sometimes he dropped by the small cafe near her workplace, always humble, never intrusive. Slowly, a quiet friendship formed between them. People who saw them together often whispered, wondering what tied them. A simple woman and a man of great influence. But neither cared much for what others thought. Their bond wasn't about wealth or fame. It was built on something much deeper, a shared moment that had shown them both what truly mattered. One evening as they were leaving the cafe, he said something that stayed with her. The day you pulled my child from that fire, I thought you saved one life. But you saved two, his and mine. You reminded me how to live again. Her throat tightened and she couldn't find words for a moment. Finally, she said softly, then maybe we both got something we didn't expect that day. As he smiled, the fading light of sunset painted the world in shades of gold. She realized how far they both had come, from strangers connected by tragedy to people who understood each other in a quiet, unspoken way. That night, when she got home, she stood by her window, looking at the stars. Life felt different now. Not glamorous, not exciting, but meaningful. She had no idea what would come next, but she knew one thing for certain. Kindness had started something that would not end soon, and somewhere, miles away in his grand home, the man sat beside his sleeping child, thinking about the same thing, how one brave heart had turned his world upside down and made him see life with new eyes. Neither of them knew it yet, but their story was only halfway told. The world had moved on, but destiny wasn't done with them. Something bigger was waiting, something that would test the meaning of courage and connection all over again. The weeks passed quietly after that, but something had begun to shift in both of their lives. The woman still lived her ordinary days, going to work, doing her errands, taking quiet walks in the evenings. But every now and then, her thoughts drifted back to the man and his child. She didn't understand why the memory stayed so fresh. Maybe it was because that day had changed so much more than just one life. Sometimes she received short messages from him, polite, thoughtful ones. He often thanked her again, though she kept telling him there was no need. Occasionally he'd share updates about his child, how the boy was recovering well, smiling again, and no longer afraid of car rides. Each time she read those messages, her heart felt lighter. Then one morning, a small package arrived at her doorstep. Inside was a handwritten note and a photo of a playground under construction. The note said that he was building it in her neighborhood, a safe space for children, dedicated to every silent hero who chooses kindness over comfort. At the bottom of the note, he had written just one line, "You inspired this." She smiled softly as she read it. It wasn't about fame or credit. It was about how goodness could ripple quietly from one act of courage. That thought made her chest warm in a way that words couldn't explain. A few days later, he called. His voice sounded calm, familiar. "I wanted to ask," he said, "would you come see the playground when it's finished? It would mean a lot. She hesitated for a moment before saying yes. When the day came, she went alone, curious but nervous. The playground stood in a small park surrounded by tall trees. The swings were shining new and the grass looked freshly laid. Children's laughter filled the air, and for a moment she just stood there watching them play. The man was there too, standing near the entrance. He looked different, more relaxed, dressed simply, almost blending in with the crowd. When he saw her, his face lit up. "You came," he said warmly. "I did," she replied, smiling. "It's beautiful." "It's more than a playground," he said softly. "It's a promise, to make safety and kindness part of this city again." They walked slowly through the park, watching families and children. He told her how the incident had changed the way he ran his business. He had started focusing on community programs, worker safety, and local development. "For years," he admitted, "I thought success meant power. Now I think it means purpose." She listened quietly, admiring how much he had changed. She could see it in the way he talked, less polished, more sincere. He wasn't just a powerful man anymore. He was a father who had found a reason to care beyond himself. As they reached a bench under a large tree, they sat down. For a while, neither spoke. The breeze rustled the leaves above, and children's laughter echoed in the distance. After a long pause, he said, "You know, I keep wondering, why did you risk your life that day?" Most people would have been too scared. She looked down at her hands, thinking. "I don't know," she said slowly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to lose someone and wish someone had done something." He turned to her. "You lost someone?" She nodded faintly. "When I was a child, my brother died in a road accident. People stood around waiting for help that came too late. I never forgot that. Maybe that's why I ran toward the car without thinking." Her voice trembled a little, but she didn't cry. It was a wound that had healed, but the scar was still there. He looked at her quietly, the understanding clear in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't know," she smiled faintly. "It's all right. Life goes on. But that day, I couldn't watch another child suffer like that." There was something about her words that stayed with him, the quiet strength behind them, the way she had turned pain into courage. After a few minutes, he said, "You know, I've been thinking about creating something lasting. Not just a playground or charity. Something that helps people prepare for emergencies. Teaches them how to act, how to save lives. Would you help me with that?" Her eyes widened. "Me? I don't know anything about organizing things like that." "You know what really matters," he said with a small smile. "That's enough." She hesitated. She wasn't used to being involved in anything important. Her life had always been simple, predictable. But there was sincerity in his voice, and something inside her told her this might be the reason fate had brought them together. "I can try," she said quietly. "That's all I need," he replied. Over the next few weeks, they began working together. She would meet him at his office sometimes, or at the construction sites for new community centers he was funding. At first, she felt out of place among the suits and formal meetings. But he made sure she was comfortable, often introducing her as the person who inspired it all. Though she always blushed when he said that. She brought ideas that no one else thought of, practical, heartfelt ones. She suggested holding workshops for parents, teaching basic safety skills and working with local volunteers instead of big companies. Her ideas were simple, but they worked. People connected with her sincerity. Soon the program started gaining attention. Reporters wrote stories about it, and people began calling her not just a hero, but a community leader. She didn't like the spotlight, but she learned to handle it gracefully. Every time she spoke at an event, she made sure to remind people that bravery wasn't about fame. "Courage," she said once, "is just doing what you know is right, even when nobody's watching." He often stood in the crowd watching her speak. Sometimes he wondered how someone so ordinary could have such quiet power. She had changed him, yes, but she was also changing others, without even trying. Their bond grew stronger with time. They shared laughter, long talks, and moments of silence that didn't feel empty. He trusted her more than he trusted most people in his world, and she began to see a side of him that few knew, the man behind the power, the father behind the image. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat together in his office, the city lights twinkling outside the tall windows. He looked tired, but peaceful. "You know," he said, leaning back in his chair, "before all this, I thought people respected me because I was powerful. Now I realize they only feared me. You taught me the difference, she smiled. You changed yourself. I just reminded you what was already there. He looked at her with a thoughtful expression, as if trying to read the spaces between her words. Then he said quietly, You've become part of my life in a way I didn't expect. Her heart skipped slightly at the honesty in his voice, but she said nothing. She didn't know what to say. Their connection wasn't something she could easily define. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was deep and real. A week later, the foundation officially launched. There was a large event in the city, banners, speeches, cameras flashing. She stood on stage beside him, nervous but proud. When he introduced her, he didn't call her a savior or hero. He simply said, This is the person who reminded me that humanity is our greatest strength. The crowd applauded, but for her the loudest sound was the quiet beat of her own heart. After the ceremony, as they stood outside watching the sunset, he said softly, You know, that day and when you pulled my child from the fire, I thought it was just a moment. But now I see it was the start of something much bigger. She looked at him and nodded. Maybe some moments are meant to change everything. For a long time they stood there in silence, both aware that their lives had become forever intertwined by a single act of courage. Later that night, when she returned home, she sat by her window again, looking at the stars just as she had months ago. But this time, something was different. She wasn't just the woman who saved a child anymore. She had found purpose, friendship, and a place in the world she never expected to belong to. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew one thing for sure. When she had run toward that burning car, she hadn't just saved a life. She had also unknowingly opened a door that would lead her toward her own transformation. And somewhere across the city, the man sat by his child's bedside, smiling as he read a bedtime story. When he turned off the light, he whispered softly, One brave heart changed everything. Neither of them said it out loud, but they both knew. Their story wasn't just about rescue anymore. It was about how kindness could build bridges between worlds that never should have met, and how sometimes a single moment of courage can start a journey that changes the course of two lives forever. Time passed, but her life didn't go back to being quiet the way she hoped it would. People still talked about her everywhere, on the news, online, even in small-town gatherings. Some called her a hero, others said she was an angel who appeared out of nowhere, but she didn't feel like one. She still woke up the same way, brushed her hair, made her tea, and looked out the same old window every morning. She didn't think much had changed inside her, but the world seemed to see her differently now. The day after the man's visit, her phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, organizations, even strangers wanted to talk to her. Some wanted to hear her story. Others wanted to offer rewards or use her face for their projects. But she didn't want that. Every time she saw herself on TV or in a newspaper, it made her uncomfortable. She hadn't saved the child for attention. She just couldn't watch and do nothing. Still, there was one thing she couldn't shake off, the memory of that man's eyes. The way they looked so tired, not from work, but from something heavier. He was powerful, yes, but in that moment, when he held his child and looked at her, he didn't look powerful at all. He looked broken, thankful, and human. A few weeks later, she received a letter in the mail. It wasn't fancy, just a white envelope with her name written neatly on the front. Inside, there was a short note. He wrote that he hadn't stopped thinking about what she said that day, about how real kindness doesn't need a reason. He said it made him realize how much he had lost touch with people who lived simply and honestly. At the end of the note, he said he would like her to attend a small charity event his company was organizing, but only if she felt comfortable. At first, she thought about ignoring it. She didn't want to step into his world, a world full of cameras, formal suits, and speeches. But something inside her told her to go, not because of fame, but because she wanted to see what kind of person he really was when the world wasn't watching. The night of the event, she wore a plain dress, the same one she had worn to her cousin's wedding years ago. When she arrived, the hall was filled with people in elegant clothes, lights flashing and music playing softly in the background. She felt out of place but reminded herself that she didn't owe anyone anything. Then she saw him, the man whose child she had pulled from that burning car. He looked different now, calmer, lighter somehow. When he saw her, he immediately walked over, his face lighting up with a smile that looked real this time. He didn't greet her like a hero. He greeted her like a friend. They talked quietly in a corner away from the crowd. He told her how the accident had changed him. He used to believe that success meant control over everything and everyone. But after that day, he realized that life doesn't follow plans, and sometimes it takes a stranger's courage to remind you what truly matters. He admitted he hadn't been the best person in the past, but he wanted to change. He told her about the foundation he was starting, one that would support emergency responders, accident victims, and families who lost loved ones. He wanted it to be something meaningful, not just another rich man's charity. He said he wanted her to help guide it. She was taken aback. "Me?" she asked softly. "I'm not trained for that kind of work. I don't even know where to start," he smiled. "You started the moment you stepped into that fire. That's all the qualification you need, and a heart that cares." She didn't know what to say. She didn't want to make promises she couldn't keep. But as the evening went on, she saw people around her. The guests, the families they were helping, the children laughing near the stage. It hit her that maybe she could do more than just save one child that day. Maybe she could help others find the same hope. After that night, she didn't hear from him for a while. Life went on, quiet, steady. She thought maybe he had moved on too. But then one morning she got another letter. This time it was an invitation to visit a newly built community center. The letter said it was the first project funded by the new foundation, and it had been named after her. Her heart stopped for a second as she read her name printed on the letterhead. She couldn't believe it. When she arrived at the center, there was no media, no grand speeches, just a few people from the neighborhood and some of the man's team. He was there too, smiling when he saw her. He showed her around: the children's playroom, the small emergency clinic, the counseling office for families in crisis. Everything had been built from the funds raised through the foundation. At the end of the tour, he said quietly, "You see, this wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. You started something that neither money nor power could create: faith in humanity." She looked at him, unsure how to respond. "You're giving me too much credit," she said with a shy laugh. He shook his head. "No, I'm giving you what you deserve. You reminded me that we all owe something to the world, not just money, but kindness." From that day on, they stayed in touch, not in a way that drew attention, but like two people walking on the same road trying to do something meaningful. Sometimes they met to discuss ideas for new projects, other times just to talk about life. As months passed, the foundation grew. More people joined, donations increased, and new programs started to take shape, from supporting accident victims to training people in first aid and fire safety. Each time a life was saved or a family got help, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, but it wasn't always easy. There were days when the work felt overwhelming. She wasn't used to being in meetings, making decisions, or giving advice to teams. She doubted herself more times than she could count. But every time she thought about giving up, she remembered the child she carried out of the flames. That memory reminded her that fear never helps anyone. Action does. The man supported her through it all. Despite his wealth, he never treated her as someone beneath him. If anything, he seemed to look up to her, for her honesty, her courage, and her unwillingness to let fame change her. Slowly, their friendship deepened into something more meaningful. He began to share parts of his life that he'd never told anyone: how success had made him lonely, how people around him often wanted favors, not friendship. He said that for the first time he felt peace just talking to someone who didn't expect anything from him. She listened, never judging. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or reputation. She cared about the person he was trying to become. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they sat outside the center watching the sunset. The air was calm, the sky painted in soft orange light. He looked at her and said, "You changed my world more than you'll ever know." She smiled faintly. Maybe it was already ready to change. "I just happened to be there." He chuckled softly. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said. "Sometimes people are meant to cross paths not because they're supposed to stay forever, but because they're meant to wake something inside us." Maybe that's all this was. He nodded, understanding her words more deeply than she realized. Over time, they both kept walking their separate paths, but they never truly drifted apart. The foundation became a symbol of what a single act of courage could do. News stories called it the ripple of one brave heart, but she didn't care about the title. What mattered to her was seeing lives change. Parents reuniting with their children, victims getting care, people feeling hope again. She never thought her life would turn out this way, that one ordinary day would lead to something so much bigger. But she also knew this wasn't just about her. It was about what kindness could build when it's real. When the man thanked her again one evening, she simply said, "You don't owe me thanks. You just owe the world a bit of the same kindness." And he smiled because he knew she was right. They stood together that night, watching the city lights in the distance, quiet, thoughtful, and grateful. Neither of them could have predicted what would come next. But one thing was certain. The fire that had once destroyed so much had also lit a spark in both their lives that would never fade. Months turned into a year, and the world slowly moved on from the headlines. The story of the woman who rescued a child from a burning car had once filled every news feed, but news stories took its place. Yet for the woman, that one day remained the moment that changed everything, not because of the fame, but because of what came after. The foundation had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. What began as a small idea was now helping hundreds of families each year. They had opened centers in different towns, provided first aid training to schools, and built a small scholarship program for children who had lost parents in accidents. Every time she visited one of the centers, she felt a quiet pride, not in herself but in the lives that were being rebuilt piece by piece. Still, she often wondered how everything had happened so fast. There were days when she sat by her window with a cup of tea, trying to make sense of it all. She thought about that moment, the smoke, the flames, the cry of the child, and realized that her life had been divided into two parts, before and after the fire. Before it, she was just someone trying to live quietly. After it, she had become part of something much bigger than herself. The man who had once been a stranger was now one of the few people she truly trusted. They had built not only a foundation together, but also an unspoken understanding. They didn't need grand words or promises. Their connection had grown from the shared belief that kindness could heal things that money never could. One afternoon, she received a call from his assistant asking her to meet him at a new site they were developing. When she arrived, she saw a large piece of land surrounded by workers and planners. The man was standing near a half-built structure, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He turned when he saw her and smiled. "You came," he said warmly. "Of course," she replied, brushing the dust off her sleeves. "What is this place?" He took a deep breath, looking around. "This will be the new headquarters of the foundation, but not just offices. I want to include a rescue training center, a play area for children, and a small memorial garden for all the lives we've touched and the ones we couldn't save." She looked at the plans and felt her throat tighten. It was beautiful, simple but full of meaning. He handed her a folder. Inside were papers that officially named her as a co-founder. Her hands froze for a moment. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You've done most of the work." He shook his head. "No, none of this would exist if not for you. You gave it a heart. I just gave it structure." She didn't know what to say. The gesture was far greater than anything she had ever expected. But more than that, it showed how deeply he respected her. Not for what she had done, but for who she was. The months that followed were busy. Together they attended meetings, supervised training programs, and spoke at schools. They shared stories of bravery, not their own, but of ordinary people who had done extraordinary things when faced with danger. They wanted to remind others that courage didn't belong to heroes in books or movies. It lived quietly in everyday hearts. During those days, their friendship deepened. Sometimes they worked late, sharing simple meals at the office while discussing ideas for upcoming projects. Other times they just sat in silence, comfortable in each other's presence. There was a calmness between them, something honest and rare. But despite the growing closeness, she remained humble. Fame had never changed her. She still lived in her small home, still greeted her neighbors, still helped people without expecting anything back. The man admired that about her. In a world full of people chasing attention, she was someone who didn't need to be seen to feel worthy. One evening, as they sat by the memorial garden under soft lights, he said quietly, "Do you ever think about that day, the accident?" She nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but not in the way I used to. At first it gave me nightmares. Now, it reminds me how fragile everything is. One moment can change everything. He looked down, his voice softer. It changed me too. Before that day, I thought power could protect me from loss. But that day I realized it can't protect what truly matters. There was a pause. The night air carried the faint sound of laughter from the nearby training center, where volunteers were sharing stories. She smiled, feeling a strange peace in her heart. Over time, they became a symbol, not of wealth or heroism, but of compassion. People often said that the foundation felt different because it was born from something real, not publicity. Whenever someone asked her how it all began, she always gave the same answer, with a cry for help and a choice to listen. Years passed, and the foundation continued to grow. She trained others, spoke at gatherings, and encouraged young people to believe in the power of small acts. She often told them that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about moving forward even when you are scared. The man, on the other hand, had changed too. The once hardened businessman had become a quiet philanthropist. He learned to see life beyond contracts and meetings. His priorities shifted from building empires to building communities. And he often credited her for that change. One morning, during an annual event, they unveiled a new section of the foundation, a large wall engraved with names of people who had shown extraordinary bravery. At the very top, her name was written. She hadn't known about it. When she saw it, her eyes filled with tears. He smiled gently and said, "It's not just for saving my child. It's for everything you've done since then. You taught us that one moment of courage can save more than a life. It can save a soul." She couldn't find words. Instead, she hugged him, a quiet, thankful embrace between two people whose lives had forever been changed by a single act. That evening, as the crowd dispersed and lights dimmed, she stood near the garden. The same sunset color she had seen a year ago painted the sky. She thought about how different her life was now, how unexpected everything had been. She had never planned to be a hero. She had never planned to meet a powerful man or run a foundation. All she had done was listen to her heart in a single terrifying moment. And somehow that choice had started a wave that touched countless lives. As she stood there lost in thought, the man came beside her. They didn't speak for a while. The quiet between them was full of meaning. Finally he said, "You know, the world expected me to change you, but it was the other way around." She smiled softly. "I think we both changed. Maybe that's how life works. It brings people together for reasons they don't understand until much later." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I used to think miracles were rare. Now I think they happen all the time. We just don't always recognize them when they're small." The wind blew gently, carrying the faint sound of children's laughter from the playground nearby, the very same sound that once echoed from that burning car. Only now it was full of life and joy. In that moment she felt everything come full circle. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty, and all of it had led here. To this garden, this peace, this purpose. She realized that every person's story had the power to change someone else's world, even if they never meant it to. As the night deepened, they both stood watching the stars appear one by one. There were no cameras, no applause, no crowd, just two people bound by an invisible thread of fate and gratitude. When they finally said goodbye that night, it wasn't with sadness. It was with understanding that their story wasn't ending, just evolving. They didn't need to be together every day to share what they had built. It lived on through the foundation, through the people they helped, through the lives that would continue to be touched long after they were gone. Years later, whenever someone asked her about the man whose child she saved, she would smile and say, "He taught me that even the most powerful hearts can be humble." And when they asked him about her, he always replied, "She reminded me what real strength looks like." And so, the story that began with smoke and fire ended in light and hope, a reminder that sometimes the smallest act of courage can change not only one life, but the course of many others.